The first time my husband laughed at my writing dreams, I should have known. But love makes you blind, and success makes the best revenge. My name is Kaya, and I've spent the last decade pretending my passion for writing was just a cute hobby. I run our family bookstore with my father, surrounded by other people's stories, while mine gathered dust in hidden folders on my laptop. That was until 6 months ago. Still working on that little book of yours? Brian's voice dripped with amusement as he walked into our home office, loosening his tie after another successful day at his marketing firm. I quickly minimized the document on my screen. Not fast enough. It's actually finished, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was thinking of sending it to some agents. He leaned against my desk, picking up the framed photo of us from our wedding day. Honey, do you know how many people try to get published every year? Maybe stick to what you're good at. The bookstore's doing great under your management. I forced a smile, the kind that had become my specialty. You're probably right. That night, after Bryant fell asleep, I sat in our bathroom with my laptop, reading through my manuscript one last time. My sister Zoe had been pushing me to submit it for months. What's the worst that could happen? She'd said over coffee last week. They say no, at least you tried. I created a new email address under the pen name Alexandra Rivers and sent my manuscript to 5 literary agents. Then I deleted the sent emails and cleared my browser history. 3 weeks later, Rachel Benson called. "Is this Alexandra Rivers?" she asked when I answered my cell phone during my lunch break at the bookstore. My heart stopped. Yes? I couldn't put your manuscript down. The character development, the plot twists. It's exactly what we're looking for. When can we meet? I glanced through the store's window at my father, Abraham, helping a customer. I actually prefer to communicate via email. I'm very private about my writing. Rachel paused. That's unusual, but we can work with it. Are you willing to do virtual meetings? And just like that, my secret career began. I wrote under the cover of darkness, edited during quiet moments at the store, and conducted all business through carefully scheduled video calls from my car during grocery runs. The book took off faster than anyone expected. By month 4, it was climbing bestseller lists. My father started stocking multiple copies in the store's front window. "Have you read this new author, Alexandra Rivers?" he asked me one morning, straightening the display. "Everyone's talking about her. Mysterious too. No photos, no social media presence." I pretended to examine the cover. Maybe she just wants her work to speak for itself. Bryant came home that evening, clutching a copy of my book. My stomach lurched. "Look what everyone at work is raving about," he said, tossing it onto the kitchen counter. "Apparently, it's the next big thing. The author's some recluse, though, probably ugly or weird." I stirred the pasta sauce harder than necessary. Maybe she just values her privacy. Who wouldn't want recognition for their work? He shook his head. "That's the whole point of success. Getting your name out there, being somebody." I watched him walk away, my hands trembling slightly. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with another email from Rachel about upcoming promotional opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on me. That weekend, Dustin, our longtime friend and local writing group organizer, stopped by the bookstore. He caught my eye and held up my book. His knowing smile made my chest tight. "Quite an achievement," he whispered, when no one was within earshot. "Your secret's safe with me, but you should be proud." I shushed him, glancing around nervously. "How did you know?" "Please, I've been reading your writing for years in group. I'd recognize your voice anywhere." He squeezed my arm. "You deserve this, Kaya." Later that night, Bryant was reading in bed, my book, of all things. "This is actually really good," he mused. "The way the main character handles betrayal, it's powerful stuff." I turned away, fighting back a bitter laugh. If he only knew how much of our life I'd woven into those pages, how many of his dismissive comments had fueled my late-night writing sessions. My phone lit up with a notification. Rachel's email subject line made my blood run cold. National Literature Awards nomination. I closed my eyes, remembering all the times Bryant had patted my head and called my writing cute, all the times his mother Sylvia had suggested I focus on real work instead of scribbling stories. The satisfaction of secret success was sweet, but something inside me knew this couldn't last forever. Sooner or later, the truth would have to come out. I just didn't know then how spectacular and devastating that revelation would be. The manuscript sat in plain sight on my desk, mocking me. I'd gotten careless, leaving printouts of early drafts scattered among my other papers. That's how everything started to unravel. "What's this?" Brian's voice made me jump. He stood in the doorway of our home office, holding pages of my novel. The real one, not the published version. "Just some writing exercises," I said, trying to keep my voice casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. He flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing. "These scenes, they're exactly like that Alexandra Rivers book. I was practicing by copying passages I liked." The lie tasted bitter in my mouth. Lots of writers do that. Bryant set the pages down, but something had changed in his expression. That night, I shredded every draft I could find and deleted files from my laptop. But the damage was done. I could feel it in the way he watched me, in his sudden interest in my writing habits. A week later, we attended a local literary event where my book was being discussed. Bryant insisted on coming, claiming he wanted to support my bookstore's involvement. The symbolism in Chapter 3 is particularly striking, one reader said during the discussion. The way the protagonist confronts her fears through that metaphor with the locked door. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, remembering writing that scene at 3 a.m. after another one of Bryant's dismissive comments about my hobby. "What do you think, honey?" Bryant squeezed my hand, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You've read it, right?" "It's interesting," I managed. Later that evening, Zoe called. "Have you seen Bryant's social media post?" I hadn't. I pulled it up and felt my stomach drop. There was a photo of him in our home office, surrounded by books, looking pensively at his laptop. The caption read, "Sometimes the biggest stories take time to tell. Can't wait to share some exciting news." "What is he doing?" Zoe's voice was sharp with concern. "I don't know," I whispered. But deep down, I did. The next morning, Rachel called during my usual grocery store hiding spot. "Alexandra, there's been an interesting development. A man named Bryant Shepard contacted our office, claiming to be you." My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "What?" "He has some convincing evidence, early drafts, notes, even a detailed outline of the plot. He says he used a female pen name to make the story more marketable." I couldn't breathe. "And you believed him?" "We're not sure what to believe. But with the National Literature Awards coming up, we need to sort this out quickly." That evening, Bryant was practically glowing when he came home. "Guess who's been nominated for a major award?" I stood in our kitchen, clutching a dish towel like a lifeline. "What did you do?" "What I had to." He stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "Think about it, Kaya. Who would believe you anyway? You've never published anything. I have connections, credibility." "It's my book," I whispered. "Is it? Where's your proof? All those drafts you shredded, those files you deleted." He touched my cheek, and I flinched. "This is better for both of us. I can make this book even bigger than it is. We'll both benefit." I jerked away from him. "You can't do this." "I already have." He pulled out an invitation from his pocket. "The awards ceremony is next month. They're expecting both of us, the brilliant author and his supportive wife." I ran to the bathroom and threw up, my whole body shaking. When I could breathe again, I called Zoe. "I'll kill him," she said immediately. "No." I wiped my face. "I need to think." "What's to think about?" "Tell everyone the truth." But it wasn't that simple. Bryant was right. I had no proof. I'd been so careful hiding my identity that I destroyed any evidence of my authorship. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Bryant did interviews, charming everyone with his humble storyteller persona. His mother Sylvia called constantly, gushing about her son's hidden talent. Even my father was impressed. "Who would have thought?" Abraham said one day at the store. Bryant, an author. No wonder he always supported you running the bookstore. I escaped to the storage room and called Dustin. People are starting to believe him, I said, my voice breaking. Then stop him, Dustin replied firmly. I've got copies of your early drafts from writing group, dated, with my comments. Would that help? I closed my eyes, thinking of the awards ceremony ahead. Keep them safe. I might need them soon. That night, Bryant practiced his acceptance speech in front of our bedroom mirror. This story came from a place of deep personal truth, he rehearsed, without a hint of irony. I watched him from the doorway, something hardening inside me. He caught my eye in the reflection and smiled. That same patronizing smile he'd given me for years when I talked about writing. The time for hiding was over. I had a speech of my own to prepare. You'll never guess who's coming to the ceremony, Bryant announced over breakfast, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Mom and Dad, of course, and I invited your father too. He was so excited. The toast in my mouth turned to ash. You invited our families. Why not? It's a celebration. He sipped his coffee, watching me over the rim. You should invite Zoe too. Make it a real family affair. I gripped my fork so hard it hurt. He was boxing me in, making it impossible to expose him without humiliating everyone we loved. Clever. Later that morning, Sylvia called while I was arranging books at the store. Darling, we simply must go shopping for the ceremony. You'll need something appropriate for the wife of a literary genius. I'm pretty busy with the store. Nonsense. I'll pick you up at 2. She hung up before I could protest. 3 hours later, I stood in an upscale boutique while Sylvia held up dresses. This one's perfect, subtle, elegant, won't draw attention from Bryant. Heaven forbid, I muttered. What was that, dear? Nothing? I forced a smile. It's beautiful. She pressed the dress into my arms. You know, I always worried about Bryant settling down with someone so simple, but now I see you were exactly what he needed, a supportive wife who could give him space to develop his talents. I disappeared into the fitting room, pressing my forehead against the cool mirror. My phone buzzed, a text from Zoe. Just got Bryant's invitation. Please tell me you have a plan. I didn't respond. That evening, Rachel called during my now routine escape to the grocery store parking lot. Alexandra, or whoever you are, this situation is unprecedented. Bryant's story about using a female pen name is gaining traction. The publicity is incredible. He's lying, I said, my voice breaking. Then prove it. Because right now, he's got a compelling narrative and evidence. What do you have? I ended the call and sat there, watching families load groceries into their cars, living their normal lives. My phone buzzed again, Dustin this time. I found more of your old drafts, he said when I answered. And I have emails from our writing group discussions. It's not much, but keep them safe, I interrupted. I'm not ready yet. Back home, Bryant was in his element, practicing his speech again. When I created this story, I poured my heart into every word. Stop. The word came out sharper than I intended. He turned, raising an eyebrow. Problem. How can you stand there and say those words? They're not yours. They are now. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And you're going to smile and support me, just like you always have. Because if you don't, you'll hurt everyone. Your father, my parents, our friends. Is that what you want? I backed away. You're a coward. No, I'm smart. I saw an opportunity and took it. That's what winners do. He straightened his tie. Now, about your dress for the ceremony. The next day at the bookstore, my father couldn't stop talking about Bryant's success. To think, all those hours he spent in his office. He was writing this masterpiece. I knocked over a stack of books. Dad, please. Are you okay? He helped me gather the fallen volumes. You seem stressed lately. I'm fine. I wasn't fine. I was drowning. That afternoon, Zoe stormed into the store. This has gone far enough. Not here, I hissed, pulling her into the storage room. He's giving interviews, Kaya. He's talking about scenes that you wrote about us, about our childhood. How can you let him steal your memories? I slid down against a shelf of books. What choice do I have? Tell the truth. Show them the proof. What proof? Everything I have is circumstantial. He's got the drafts, the notes. He's got forgeries. She knelt beside me. And you've got me. I remember every story you told me while writing this book, every late-night call about plot points, every tear you shed when Bryant dismissed your dreams. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The ceremony's in 3 days. Then we have 3 days to prepare. She squeezed my hand. No more hiding. That night, Bryant hosted a small dinner party for his literary friends. I watched him hold court in our living room, describing his creative process with perfect conviction. The character's journey really reflects my own struggles with identity and recognition, he said, and everyone nodded appreciatively. I excused myself and went upstairs to our bedroom. Opening my laptop, I began to write. Not a novel this time, but a different kind of story. The true story. My phone lit up with a text from Dustin. Whatever you decide to do, I've got your back. We all do. I looked at my reflection in the window, hearing Bryant's laughter float up from downstairs. 3 days until the ceremony. 3 days until I either accepted this theft of my identity or fought back. The choice was becoming clearer with every stolen word that came out of my husband's mouth. The National Literature Awards ceremony buzzed with energy. Cameras flashed as Bryant guided me through the entrance, his hand pressed firmly against my lower back. The dress Sylvia chose felt like a straitjacket. Smile, he whispered through his teeth. Everyone's watching. They were. Literary critics, publishers, and authors filled the grand hall, all eager to meet the mysterious writer who'd captured readers' hearts. My heart, my words. Bryant. Rachel approached us, elegant in a black evening gown. Her eyes flickered to me briefly. And this must be your wife. Kaya, right? I nodded, watching her search my face. Did she recognize my voice from our calls? There's my boy. Sylvia's voice cut through the crowd. She and Bryant's father arrived, followed by my dad and Zoe. My sister's expression was thunderous. Quite a turnout, Abraham said, beaming with pride. Bryant, son, you've done us all proud. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I found Zoe waiting. I brought what you asked for. She pulled a USB drive from her clutch. Dustin's copies of your drafts, emails, everything. My hands shook as I took it. I don't know if I can do this. Look at me. She gripped my shoulders. That man out there is stealing your life's work, your voice, your story. But Dad looks so happy. Dad will be prouder knowing his daughter wrote that book, not his fraud of a son-in-law. The ceremony began. I sat between Bryant and my father, watching speakers praise the year's literary achievements. Bryant squeezed my hand when they announced the major awards category, and the National Literature Award goes to Bryant Shepard for Shadows of Silence. The room erupted in applause. Bryant stood, straightening his jacket. He kissed my cheek before heading to the stage. I've dreamed of this moment, he began, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. This story came from the deepest part of my soul. I felt sick. These were my words. My soul he was laying bare. The protagonist's journey reflects my own struggles with identity, he continued. The scene where she confronts her past in her grandmother's attic, that was inspired by my own childhood. Beside me, Zoe made a small, angry sound. That scene was about our grandmother, about the summer we spent sorting through her belongings after she died. Writing has always been my secret passion, Bryant said, his voice breaking perfectly. I chose a female pen name because I wanted the story to speak for itself, free from preconceptions. Rachel watched from the front row, her expression unreadable. Sylvia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. And finally, I want to thank my wonderful wife, Kaya. He gestured to me. Her support made this possible. The spotlight found me. Hundreds of eyes turned in my direction. My father patted my hand proudly. Something snapped. I stood up. Kaya, Bryant's voice held a warning edge. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The room fell silent. Honey, this isn't the time. Bryant started, but I was already climbing the steps. Actually, I said, my voice carrying through his microphone. This is exactly the time. Sylvia half rose from her seat. Bryant, what is she doing? I reached into my clutch and pulled out the USB drive. I have something to share with everyone. Kaya, don't. Bryant grabbed my arm, but I pulled away. The scene in the grandmother's attic? I turned to face the audience. That was my grandmother, my attic, my memory. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Rachel lean forward in her seat. I can prove it. My voice grew stronger. I have the original drafts, dated emails, witnesses from my writing group. I am Alexandra Rivers. The room erupted in chaos. Cameras flashed. People stood up. Bryant tried to grab the microphone, but I held firm. The protagonist's struggle with identity, that was mine. Every word, every scene, every emotion, they're all mine. She's lying, Bryant said desperately. She's just upset, emotional. Read page 158. I challenged the audience. The scene where the main character finds her grandmother's old recipe box. Ask me what was in it. Ask me about the hidden letter beneath the snickerdoodle recipe. Ask me anything about this book, my book. Security approached the stage. Bryant smiled nervously at the crowd. My wife has been under a lot of stress lately. Check the USB drive, I said quickly. Compare the writing group drafts with the published version. Look at the timestamps, the email trails. That's enough. Bryant tried to lead me away, but I planted my feet. No, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've had enough of being quiet. In the audience, my father stood frozen. Zoe was filming everything on her phone. Sylvia looked like she might faint. And there, in the front row, Rachel Benson pulled out her phone and started making calls. The truth was out. Now I just had to prove it. Security didn't remove me from the stage. Instead, Rachel's voice cut through the chaos. Let her speak. The audience settled into an uneasy quiet. Bryant's hand fell away from my arm. The proof is all here, I said, holding up the USB drive. But let me tell you something that isn't in any file. Let me tell you about the night I wrote the final chapter. Rachel nodded to a technician, who connected my drive to the presentation system. The screen behind me flickered to life. It was 3 a.m, I continued. I was sitting in our bathroom, because Bryant said my typing kept him awake. I wrote about a woman finding her voice, not knowing I was really writing about myself. The first document appeared on screen, my original draft, dated and time-stamped, with Dustin's comments in the margins. That's my writing group feedback, Dustin called out from the audience. Standing up, I can verify every word. Bryant stepped forward. Those could be fabricated. Page 243, I cut him off. The recipe box scene. Tell them what was under the snickerdoodle recipe, Bryant. Tell them about the letter. He opened his mouth, then closed it. It was a love letter, I said, my voice breaking. From my grandmother to a man who wasn't my grandfather. A secret she took to her grave that only Zoe and I knew about. Want to know how I know? Because we found it together. Zoe stood up. The letter was dated June 15th, 1962. It was written on blue stationery with a torn corner. The man's name was Robert. Cameras flashed. Journalists typed frantically on their phones. But that's not all, I continued. The protagonist's fear of thunderstorms. That came from the night Zoe and I hid under our grandmother's quilt during a blackout. The description of the attic's smell, mothballs, and old leather, that's real. Every detail is memory, not imagination. Rachel approached the stage, holding her phone. I have every email exchange with Alexandra Rivers here. The writing style matches perfectly. The voice is identical. This is ridiculous. Sylvia stood up, her face flushed. Bryant would never. Ask him to explain any part of the writing process, I challenged. Ask him about the character arcs, the symbolism, the research. Ask him anything. Bryant's confident facade cracked. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The locked door metaphor in Chapter 3 called out a literary critic from the second row. What inspired that? Bryant stammered. Well, you see, the door represents. It was our first apartment, I interrupted. The door would stick in humid weather. You had to shoulder it open, just like the protagonist had, to force her way through her fears. You wouldn't know that, Bryant, because you were never there. You were too busy at the office. The audience murmured. More people stood up, phones recording. The proof is overwhelming, Rachel announced. The timestamps, the drafts, the consistent writing style and emails. Mr. Shepard, do you have anything to say in your defense? Bryant's shoulders slumped. For a moment, he looked smaller, vulnerable. Then his eyes hardened. You want the truth? His voice cracked. Fine. I found her manuscript. I read it. It was good. Better than good. But who was she? Nobody. Just a bookstore manager with a hobby. I could make it successful. I had the connections, the credibility. You had no right, I whispered. I made your book famous. He turned to me, desperate. Look what I did for it. The interviews, the publicity. You stole my voice, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You stole my memories, my grandmother's story, my childhood with Zoe. You stole everything that made this book real. My father stood up slowly. Bryant, how could you? Dad, Bryant turned to his father. Mom, I just wanted. But Sylvia had already turned away, her shoulders shaking. Security finally approached, but not for me. They escorted Bryant off the stage as Rachel took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of this evidence, the National Literature Awards Committee will need to reconvene. But I think it's clear who the real Alexandra Rivers is. The room erupted in applause. Journalists swarmed forward, calling my name, my real name. Through the chaos, I saw my father pushing through the crowd. Kaya, he reached for me, tears in his eyes. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid, I said, letting him pull me into a hug. I didn't want to disappoint you. Disappoint me? My daughter wrote a bestseller. I've never been more proud. Zoe joined our hug, squeezing tight. Told you the truth would set you free. Over their shoulders, I watched Bryant being led away. He looked back once, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Defeat. Rachel touched my arm. We have a lot to discuss, Alexandra, or should I say, Kaya. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. Kaya, my name is Kaya, and I have more stories to tell. The aftermath exploded like a storm. Reporters camped outside our bookstore. My phone buzzed constantly, and social media erupted with hot takes and hashtags. But it was the quiet conversation in our living room that shook me most. I need to explain, Bryant said, sitting across from me. His tie was loose, dark circles under his eyes. 2 days had passed since the ceremony. There's nothing to explain. I started to stand, but Zoe put a hand on my shoulder. Let him talk, she said. You need to hear this. Bryant pulled out an old photograph, himself as a child, holding up a story he'd written. I was 8 here. Mom had it framed. Why are you showing me this? Because it was the last time she was proud of anything I created. His voice cracked. After this, everything I wrote was derivative, or shallow, or not up to the family standard. That doesn't excuse. No, it doesn't. He rubbed his face. But when I found your manuscript, God, Kaya, it was everything I'd ever wanted to write. Everything Mom always said I couldn't do. Zoe scoffed. So you stole it? I convinced myself I could do it justice, that I could give it the platform it deserved. He laughed bitterly. I sound pathetic, don't I? Yes, I said, but something in my chest tightened. The doorbell rang. Sylvia stood outside, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. May I come in? She asked quietly. I nodded, and she entered, freezing when she saw Bryant. The tension in the room could have cut glass. I found these. She pulled out a stack of papers from her bag. In the attic. Bryant's old stories, from when he was young. Bryant stiffened. Mom, don't. They're beautiful. she whispered. Creative, imaginative. And I killed that creativity, didn't I? That doesn't matter now, he said. It matters. She slammed the papers down. I did this. I made you believe you weren't good enough, and look what it led to. I watched them, mother and son, both breaking in different ways. I wanted to make you proud. Bryant's voice was barely audible. By lying, by stealing. Sylvia shook her head. I raised you better than that. Did you? He stood up suddenly. All I ever heard was how I wasn't measuring up, how I needed to be more successful, more impressive, more everything. Bryant, I started, but he was on a roll. Do you know what it's like, living with that pressure, watching your wife create something so beautiful while he choked, while you can barely string two sentences together because your mother's voice is always in your head, telling you it's not good enough? Sylvia sank into a chair, her face ashen. I never meant. I know you didn't, he said softly. But you did it anyway. The room fell silent. Outside, a camera flashed, another photographer hoping for a shot through our windows. I have to face the consequences, Bryant said finally. The publishing house is suing. My firm put me on leave. It's all falling apart. Good, Zoe muttered. But I wasn't so sure anymore. You need help, I said, surprising myself. Professional help, both of you do. Sylvia nodded slowly. She's right. Why are you being kind to me? Bryant asked. After what I did. Because I understand pressure, I said. I understand feeling like you're not enough. It's why I hid behind a pen name in the first place. The difference is, Zoe interjected, you didn't steal someone else's work. No, I agreed. But I'm not interested in revenge anymore. I just want my life back, my voice back. Bryant stood up. I'll move out tonight. Yes, I said. You will. He gathered his coat, then paused. The book, it really is brilliant, Kaya. I'm sorry I tried to make it mine. After he and Sylvia left, Zoe hugged me. You're too forgiving. No, I wiped my eyes. I'm just tired of anger. It's time to write my own next chapter. My phone buzzed. Rachel again. The publishing house wants to meet tomorrow. They're talking about a multi-book deal, under your real name this time. I looked around our living room, at the life Bryant and I had built. The bookstore receipts on the coffee table, the family photos on the wall, the half-finished manuscript in my laptop. Tell them yes, I said, but I have one condition. What's that? The dedication in the next edition of Shadows of Silence. I want to change it. To what? I thought about Bryant's childhood stories, about Sylvia's crushing expectations, about my own journey to find my voice. To everyone who's ever felt not good enough, I said, sometimes the hardest story to tell is your own. Zoe squeezed my hand. Now that's a story worth telling. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through our windows. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, interviews, legal meetings, decisions about the future. But for now, I sat in my quiet living room, opened my laptop, and began to write. This time, under my own name. And how did it feel when your husband claimed your work as his own? The talk show host leaned forward. Her expression practiced sympathy. Like drowning, I said simply. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about my new book. 3 months had passed since the award ceremony. Bryant had moved to Seattle, started therapy, and signed a legal agreement acknowledging his theft. The media circus was finally dying down, but the aftermath still rippled through our lives. Of course, the host smiled. But surely our viewers want to know. They want to know about the story, I interrupted firmly. About hope, redemption, and finding your voice. That's what matters. Backstage, after the interview, Zoe handed me a coffee. You handled that well. I'm tired of being the woman whose husband stole her book. I want to be known for my writing. Speaking of writing, she pulled out her phone, showing me the latest bestseller list. My new novel, written under my real name, sat at number 3. Not bad for a bookstore manager with a hobby, I grinned. The bookstore had changed too. Dad had added an local author section, prominently featuring both my books. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "Remember when we used to hide your manuscripts in the storage room?" he said that evening, as we closed up shop. "Now look at you." A customer approached the counter, clutching my new book. "Would you sign this? I love how you wrote about forgiveness." It must have been hard, after everything. I signed the book, thinking about Bryant's last email. "I'm doing better. The therapist says I need to find my own voice. Maybe someday I'll actually write something worth reading." "It's not always about forgiveness," I told the customer. "Sometimes it's about understanding." Later that night, Rachel called with news. "The film rights are generating a lot of interest, and there's talk about a speaking tour, writing workshops, literary festivals. People want to hear your story, the real one." I looked at my laptop, where my third novel was taking shape. "Will I still have time to write?" "We'll make time," she promised. "That's what matters most now." The next morning, Dustin stopped by the store. "The writing group misses you." "I miss them too." "Come back," he said, "not as a famous author, just as Kaya, who used to bring terrible coffee and great stories." I hugged him. Next Tuesday. The bell above the door chimed, and Sylvia walked in. We hadn't spoken since that night in my living room. "I've been reading your new book," she said quietly. "The mother in the story. Is she me?" "She's every parent who pushes too hard," I replied. "Every voice that makes someone doubt themselves." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Bryant called yesterday. He's writing again. Children's stories, if you can believe it." "I can," I said, and meant it. My phone buzzed, another interview request. The subject line read, "From Shadow to Spotlight, the Kaya story." "No," I said aloud, typing a response. "That's not my story anymore." Zoe looked up from the book she was shelving. "What is your story?" I gestured around the bookstore, at the readers browsing shelves, at my father helping a young girl find the perfect book, at my laptop, waiting for the next chapter. "This," I said, "all of this." That evening, I got an unexpected email from the National Literature Awards Committee. They were creating a new category for emerging voices, and they wanted me to be a judge. "Your experience," the email read, "has sparked an important conversation about authenticity and recognition in literature." I thought about all the writers out there, hiding their words, doubting their voices, about Bryant, starting over with children's stories, about Sylvia, learning to listen instead of judge, about my own journey from silence to speech. "Yes," I wrote back, "I'd be honored." At home, I opened my laptop to work on the new novel. The protagonist was different this time, not running from her past, but running toward her future, not hiding her voice, but letting it soar. My phone lit up with a text from Zoe. "Dad wants to expand the bookstore. Says we need more room for the local authors section. Wonder whose fault that is." I smiled, thinking about the shy writers who now approached me at the store, sharing their hidden manuscripts, their secret dreams. Every time I told them the same thing: "Your voice matters, use it." The cursor blinked on my screen. Waiting. Outside, rain tapped against the windows of my new apartment, smaller than the old house, but filled with books and light and possibility. I began to type. This time, there was no bathroom hiding spot, no secret pen name, no fear of judgment, just words flowing from my fingers, telling stories that needed to be told. My story wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about Bryant or betrayal, or even forgiveness. It was about finding my voice, and finally, gloriously, using it. The bookstore hummed with excited voices as readers filled every available space. My father stood near the entrance, beaming as he directed traffic. Zoe arranged the last few chairs in our newly expanded reading area. "Ready?" Rachel touched my shoulder, clipboard in hand. I nodded, watching the crowd settle. This wasn't just another book signing or reading. This was different. "Welcome to Writer's Voice," I said into the microphone. "A safe space for hidden stories." The workshop participants, 20 aspiring writers, clutched their notebooks. Some had been hiding their words for years, decades even, just like I had. Before we begin, I said, I want to introduce someone. Bryant stepped forward from the back of the store. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He looked different, calmer, less polished, more real. Hi, he said simply. I'm here to talk about what happens when you steal someone else's voice instead of finding your own. The room fell silent. This wasn't part of the program they'd signed up for. My first book comes out next month, he continued. A children's story about a little boy who learns it's okay to fail. I wrote every word myself. It's not going to win awards. It might not even sell well, but it's mine. I watched the workshop participants lean forward, drawn in by his honesty. The hardest part wasn't the public shame or the legal consequences, Bryant said. It was facing myself in the mirror and admitting I'd silenced someone else because I was too afraid to speak with my own voice. Sylvia, sitting in the front row, wiped her eyes. Now, I took the microphone back. Let's talk about your stories, the ones you've been afraid to tell. One by one, they shared. A grandmother who'd been writing romance novels in secret for 30 years. A teenager with a sci-fi epic hidden under his bed. A businessman who wrote poetry during his lunch breaks. Why do we hide? I asked them. Fear of judgment, someone called out. Not good enough, said another. Family expectations, a quiet voice added. I pulled out my first novel, the one Bryant had claimed. This book isn't just about finding your voice. It's about what happens when you let others silence it. The door chimed. My father led in a group of young writers from the local high school, where I'd started mentoring. Your voice matters, I told the room. Even if it shakes, even if it whispers, even if you think no one wants to hear it. Bryant stood up again. I have something for everyone here. He handed out copies of his children's book, not yet released. This is what starting over looks like. It's not perfect, but it's authentic. I watched him interact with the workshop participants, saw how they responded to his vulnerability. Redemption wasn't about grand gestures. It was about small truths, quietly shared. The bookstore's writing group meets every Tuesday, I announced. You're all welcome, no hiding allowed. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, Sylvia approached Bryant. Their relationship was still fragile, but healing. I'm proud of you, she said softly. Not because of success or failure, but because you're finally being honest. Rachel caught my eye, pointing to her watch. I had a publisher's meeting in an hour about my next book. Go, Zoe said. I'll clean up here. But I wasn't ready to leave. The energy in the room felt too important to abandon. The meeting can wait, I told Rachel. These stories can't. I sat with the remaining participants, listening to their hidden words emerge, each voice unique, each story valuable. Bryant joined us, keeping a respectful distance, but participating genuinely. I'm learning to listen, he said when someone asked why he was there. Really listen. My father brought us coffee, pride shining in his eyes, as he watched his expanded bookstore become exactly what it was meant to be, a sanctuary for stories. This feels right, he said, squeezing my shoulder. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the fresh paint on the wall behind the reading area. In careful letters, we'd written, "Every voice matters." Under it, bookshelves held works by local authors, their dreams no longer hidden in storage rooms or bathroom writing sessions. My books sat among them, not above, not below, just part of the chorus. Same time next week? Someone asked as the workshop wound down. Every week, I promised, for as long as there are stories to tell. Bryant paused at the door on his way out. Thank you, he said quietly, not for forgiving me, but for showing me what real writing looks like. I watched him leave, then turned back to my notebook where I'd been jotting down ideas for the next workshop. The page was filled with possibilities, each one a potential voice waiting to be heard. The bookstore settled into evening quiet, but it wasn't silence anymore. It was anticipation, the peaceful pause between words that makes the story possible. I opened my laptop and began to write.